Welcome to Murder in the Air Mystery Theater. I'm your host, Laurie Fagen. In this podcast series, I'll interview authors who will then read their mystery, suspense, or thriller short stories or a chapter from their published books. In addition, sprinkled throughout the coming weeks, the podcast will feature radio theater style sections from the audiobooks for my 3 crime fiction novels. On today's show, we're pleased to have longtime novelist and writer Merle McCann from Cave Creek, Arizona, which is a suburb in the northern section of the Phoenix metropolitan area. Merle has written many mysteries, but also historical fiction, contemporary novels, standalones, and series, including for middle readers, as well as short stories. Welcome to the show, Merle.
Thank you for having me, Laurie. I'm looking forward to our time together.
Thank you. Me too. You know, we have known each other for a number of years through the Sisters in Crime organization. And when we first met, you were writing the Long Johners mystery series for middle readers. Is that where you got your start in your fiction career?
It wasn't really the start. However, it was the first thing that drew some public attention to my writing. And it was one of those things we do for passion. It's something I cared a great deal about because of the problem with children in America today unable to read. And that's what this Long Johners mystery series is all about, helping the kids get that reading down.
And how many books did you have in that series?
It's a series of 5. It was intended to be a series of 12. But by the time I wrote 5, I was somewhat exhausted in that particular age group.
That makes sense. Obviously, you have expanded your repertoire, but how is it to go from writing mysteries to contemporary and then historical? How do you juggle all that?
Well, I do one project at a time. Some of my writer friends have 2 and 3 novels cooking all at the same time. I could never do that. But I have a great love of history, and I think was a born storyteller. I was that kid in the classroom who was always singled out, and my parents were told I talked too much. And what I was doing was sharing stories with my fellow students. It got me into an awful lot of trouble, and it took me a long time to link together what was actually going on with my later writing career.
Interesting. So you just write a mystery, and then you might go write a contemporary, and then you might go write a historical then, just one.
That's very true. That's very true. Bouncing from one to the next project is easy for me.
Is it? Interesting. And so you're enjoying writing for adults now, right?
Oh, yes, I absolutely am. Good. Yeah, I am.
We mentioned that you have written a number of books and short stories too, but your newest book that just came out earlier this year is called Murder at Harmony Farm, a Molly Raines story about a Phoenix homicide detective who investigates fraud within the Arabian horse world. Now, before we talk about the book specifically, tell our listeners about your background with Arabian horses.
Well, it goes way back. My husband and I are both city kids and basically had no experience with animals whatsoever. And he decided one day, like his older brother, he'd like to own a horse. And so we bought a horse and from a guy out in a field, and they delivered the horse to where we told them to bring it. And the guy hurriedly emptied the horse from the trailer, hopped in his truck, and drove away. And my husband stood there holding the lead line, and the horse immediately stepped on him.
Oh, dear.
And I looked at my husband and I said, "Do you know how to put a bridle on?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Do you know how to put a saddle on?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Well, you better wait right here. I'll go get help." That was our awkward start. But jump forward numbers of years, and we got very involved with the horses. We were on a learning curve, and we learned and discovered quite a bit about the horses in general. And then one day we saw an Arabian mare, and we were both awestruck with her beauty. And we did some research and decided that's what we would like to have. And we got very involved, and we met people, and they carried us along. And one day, my husband came home from his job in the city. He was a banker. And he said, I want to get more involved with the horses. I want to change my career path. And we did that. It required we move to southern Alberta, where he was partnering with a veterinarian. And we learned a lot about a variety of animal industries, sheep, cattle, horses, and how one makes a business out of the Arabian horse included showing the horse. So we took that on, and finally, to get to the point of the story, he was offered a position in Scottsdale, Arizona, to be a business manager for the world's finest Arabian breeding ranch. And that brought us to Arizona. And over all of these years, it's just simply been a learning curve. And it was fascinating to me, and I loved every aspect of it. When he decided to do something on his own, we started a management company with his expertise in the Arabian horse industry. And he had clients around the world, across the continent. And I traveled with him eventually. And we had so many adventures.
For how many years was that?
Well, we've been involved probably now 35 years. The funniest thing that crosses my mind when I think about those early years is that it was such a bizarre thing for the two of us to do when we had no animal history at all. But when we decided that he was going to change his career, I wrote my parents and told them about it. And from that time on, every letter started out, "Don't worry, Mom, we're doing fine."
Funny. Oh my gosh. So, but you learned it.
We did.
Persevered and you learned
Yes,
it.
and my husband is considered to be an expert. We had some very glamorous clients. Don has picked out and purchased horses for Mike Nichols, the director in New York. Mm-hmm. And we spent time with Arm & Hammer in Los Angeles. We had so many adventures, met so many wonderful people. Having this idea that I like to write the mystery side, it's been wonderful to incorporate it into the horse ranching world.
Is this the first book that you have included?
No, I have a historical called Fistful of Grit that's set in the Palouse country of the Northwest. Well, one of my books is it's a suspense. It's suspenseful, but it's more of a saga called Vagabonds and Kings. The main character in that story loves horses and involves horses in his life, and it's based on a real person. I followed his early years. I had to fictionalize it because the entire story takes place before I was born. So 30 years of research before I felt capable of writing that man's story. Right. But a lot of horse activity in that book too.
Good. Well, it does make sense that you would include it now, again, in your Murder at Harmony Farm. So talk a little bit more about the book and your detective, Molly Raines, and her investigation.
Well, Molly Raines actually appeared for the first time in a short story that was published by Desert Sleuth's chapter of Sisters in Crime. And I had a little bit of a following. Well, I shouldn't say little bit. I don't know how large it might have been. One reader contacted me after reading our anthology and that story and said, I like your detective so much. I hope you will write more using that character. And I've put it off probably for 10 years. But I went ahead and I thought, okay, Molly's got to get busy. And so I wrote this story, and it is about the crimes that she solves. I love to tell a tale on myself. I'm a pantser. I don't outline unless I'm absolutely forced into it. I jumped into Molly's story, Murder at Harmony Farm, and the first crime was committed. And that led to another crime. And then that led to another crime. And I was kind of rounding out the third crime. And it struck me, why not have the ranch owner's wife lose her 4-carat diamond ring that has 2 brilliant cut emeralds on either side of that big diamond. Why not have that stolen? Pretty soon I was getting to the point where it was time to finish the story, and I thought, oh my goodness, I've got all these crimes I have to solve. Right. Well, that's when I turned to outlining. I had to tie all those loose ends together. It was a real challenge. And I promised myself I would never do that again. But I will.
You will? Oh my God. Will. Well, look forward to reading that book. But let's talk a little bit more about writing. And obviously, for the pantser, for those of you who may not be aware, that's somebody who writes from the seat of their pants and does not typically outline, where an outliner, that's who I am, does keep a fairly extensive list of what's going to happen next. And for me, it just kind of helps me know when I'm sitting down the next day where I'm going. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't add things or that your characters can't tell you something else that they want to do. And you think, wait a minute, that wasn't in the outline, but you go with it anyway, right?
I suspect you have found, as I have, that sometimes your characters on the page will simply run away with you. They take over the job of getting the story told.
Indeed.
And instead of leading the horse is leading you.
That's right. It's a little spooky sometimes. But
yes, it is.
I know a lot of writers that happens to, which is, it's just an interesting part of our brain, how that all works. So what is your writing process like? What is your best time to write?
I write throughout the day. My husband and I are both active, and just with kind of keeping house and home together and all that requires. I've been known to get up at 5 a.m. because I'm trying to finish something on the page, but that's a rarity. I typically start after breakfast and I work through the day. I do work 7 days a week because I can't be sure that tomorrow will be a day when I can get enough done. So I take advantage of every opportunity, every moment of time I come in. And I'll tell you, for me, it's like therapy. I come in, I sit down, I relax, and I let the stories start to run through my mind, and then I start to write. And I don't know what I would do if I didn't write.
It is therapeutic, for many, absolutely. What would you say is the most surprising thing you've discovered about writing?
First of all, the most surprising thing is I turned out to be a writer. I went to college late in life. I saw to my husband's education, and my children, our two kids were teenagers in high school. And my husband was traveling so much with our management company. I thought, this would be a good time for me to get some college experience. And I just fell into this class that was an English class required, and it was all about writing. And I had such a good time writing the assignments. And my professor took me aside and said, have you ever considered being a professional writer? And I said, oh, heavens, no. And she said, well, rethink it because you have an innate talent for this. So at some point, I remember driving, we were living outside Dallas, Texas, and I was driving my husband to the airport as I did every week, every day in, day out. And I said to him, I think I could write. I may try that. And I didn't. I let a couple of years go by, and I met a published writer, and I spoke with her. And she said, write 100 pages and I'll tell you what I think. And I did that, and she approved, and she worked with me for about the next 10 years. And so I don't have the standard writer's education or background. I had a mentor who was so fabulous. I learned so much from her, and we had such a good time doing it. You'll notice when you pick up one of my books, every published book that I have done has a dedication to her. She made me the writer that I am, for good or for bad. It's her fault.
That is great to have somebody like that to encourage you, and to that college professor who put it in your brain to say, yes, you can do it.
Yeah, but that's the biggest surprise that even happened at all.
That's great. So what are you working on next, Merle?
I haven't decided. I'll tell you, kicking off Murder at Harmony Farm, we incurred some mechanical problems and they had to be dealt with. And so I'm kind of in a relaxing mode right now. I wrote a book called Vagabonds and Kings. It was a grand prize winner in the Dixie Kane Memorial Contest out of Louisiana.
Congratulations.
And it enjoyed a high level of interest. That book sold a lot. And I got letters from writers saying, you ought to write a sequel. And I did. And that book is titled Catherine. And it's the woman that he married at the end of Vagabonds and Kings, the woman he met and married. Catherine starts from before she's born to the time she marries her husband. And I'm giving thought to writing the third. It's been requested, but I'm a little worried about writing that story. So I'm kind of putting it off and thinking about it. I have a couple of things in mind, but I'm in a lull. For right now, I'm just in a lull.
As most writers know, there's always something kind of percolating in the back of the mind,
yes.
Right?
Yes. Yeah. I'll tell you, I enjoyed writing Murder at Harmony Farm so much. It has more police procedure in it than I normally write, but I'm blessed to have a retired homicide detective here in Phoenix who helps me when I have questions about police procedure. He's so capable, and he will say to me, now, this isn't how they show it on television, but this is how you really do it. And I will say, I know, but I have a reader out there who knows what it looks like on television, and that's what they relate to. And he said, all right. Well, we'll keep that in mind.
And I think we used that very same person, Tim Moore, correct?
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh, he's been so helpful to me too, especially with weapons and a lot of details. Yes. Timothy Moore has written a book called The Mirandized Nation about Miranda rights and the actual man that it was named for.
It's so interesting because Mr. Miranda was right here in Phoenix, and that Tim was a youngster in the department, but he never forgot the way it all rolled out. And he said to me one time, I knew early on if I could ever learn to write, that would be the first thing I would write, is about Miranda. And so he did.
He did.
We all adored Detective Tim Moore.
That is so true. And he's been so helpful and generous with his time. I think he is working on and close to having his first fiction novel out too, I believe. So we'll have to keep in touch with him. Okay, so Phoenix author Merle McCann has also written a short story called Who Shot the Sheriff? It's set in a fictional Arizona town along the Colorado River, and I'm going to read it. Who Shot the Sheriff? By Merle McCann. Crabby Bill burst through the swinging doors of the saloon at the Little Eden Hotel. Big Jim's water wheel got blowed up, and I can't find the sheriff. Anybody seen that no-good lawman? Doc Richards looked up from the poker table and glared. None of the other men responded. Most continued to stare down at their cards or their drinks. Sally Webster, bartender and owner of Curlyville's Little Eden, stopped polishing glassware and rushed to the front curve of the bar where Bill stood. Was Jim hurt? Did you see him? I saw nary a soul. He gestured wildly with both hands. I was drifting down the Colorado in my canoe, and wham! A fireball sailed sky high, and Jim's wheel was gone right behind me. Lucky I weren't killed. Got me a mighty push from the waves that big thing kicked up in the river. Sent me all the way to town without dipping an oar. Could have glided the extra 15 miles to Yuma. Doc Richards tossed his cards on the table and hoisted his considerable girth from his chair. I best find out if I'm needed. He cut through the tables to the bar where Sally stood. A poker player harumphed. Mayor Healy's tried to force Jim into buying water from his canal for over 2 years. 2 years, 3 water wheels blown to hell. He folded his cards. Jim can buy another wheel for what that old mudsill charges for 4 months of water. Doc patted Sally's hand. Don't fret, sweetheart. I expect Big Jim's just fine. He eased his flat-crowned hat onto his head. It's rotten the way Healy keeps going after him. Wish he'd just leave Jim the hell alone. Sally's shoulders sagged. Healy owns Sheriff Cotton. He won't do anything. A cowpuncher leaned against the bar. It's not the water. Mayor Healy's trying to ruin Jim, and everybody knows it. Wants his land and mineral rights. Healy's destroyed others around here. Someone ought to find the guts to call Healy out. One day, Jim might have to. Another poker player slid his eyes toward Doc Richards. I never saw Big Jim use a gun. Doubt he could take a man down in the street. I heard tell Sheriff Cotton's no lawman. He's a gunslinger wearing a badge only till he kills Jim. One-a-day Brown, Little Eden's piano player and janitor, sauntered into the saloon with the mail. He headed straight for Doc. You got a parcel, Doc? Another science book? Doc studied the label. Looks like it. Medicine is always changing, so I gotta keep up. This one's on forensics. That'd be medicine and understanding crime scenes. A German scientist by the name of Johann Frank wrote it. Doc Richards was hardly out the door when a miner approached Sally and placed 3 quarters on the bar. He lowered his voice. That fancy belly dancing gal working upstairs? Lily? Sally picked up the money. Check with Mrs. Weaver. 3rd floor, 1st room to your left. I'm sure her door's open. He chuckled. I know the way. I'll bet you do, Sally muttered. She motioned to One-a-day. Will you take over? I'm going to change my dress for the evening. She passed Mrs. Weaver on the landing. Did you hear about Big Jim? Sally asked. Mrs. Weaver nodded. From 2 customers already. If the mayor can't get to Big Jim directly, do you think he'll come at Little Eden? Everybody knows Jim favors you. Sally shook her head. Not as long as I keep paying him 10% of profits each month. 10? Mrs. Weaver barked. I've paid him 20 since his first day in office. The dirty crook. An hour past sundown, the saloon was filled to capacity with silver miners, cowhands, card players, and merchants. Sally's black sequined dress caught the lantern light as she moved behind the bar. Customers stood shoulder to shoulder, many resting boots on the brass rail. Most of the tables were occupied with poker players. The smell of cigar smoke and whiskey rose above them. At the piano, One-a-day pounded out the same 5 tunes he had the night before and the night before that. His bowed legs dangled 6 inches above the floor. He clamped his teeth on the stub of a fat cigar and bounced to the rhythm on the edge of the stool. Voices rose and fell in the clamor. Mrs. Weaver's 3 working girls, in satin dresses showing plenty of skin, flirted with customers, hustled drinks, and dodged pawing hands. Mrs. Weaver moved among the tables, warning the lusty men with a swat of her folded fans to keep their wandering mitts to themselves. Doc Richards pushed through the doors and walked to the end of the bar where Sally joined him. I managed to catch the sheriff earlier sneaking down your side stairs, he said quietly. Asked him if he was investigating Jim's blown water wheel. He pushed his hat back with one finger. The varmint laughed. That's how interested he is. The mayor's got him on a short rein. I know, Sally sighed. Your pinochle pals are waiting for you. She reached for a glass. Want your usual? He nodded with a grin. Right on schedule, Deputy Dolph Zandak stopped in for a nightcap at the end of his shift. Jenny Bull, one of Mrs. Weaver's girls, brought him his usual drink, and 20 minutes later, they sashayed upstairs together. Just before midnight, Sheriff Slade Cotton came by for coffee and conversation with Sally, something he did routinely since arriving in Curlyville. Cotton was the third sheriff the mayor had hired in only 9 months. He grinned when he saw Sally. "Evening, ma'am. You're looking pretty tonight." He leaned toward her. "I swear, Sally, you do stir my blood." She poured him 2 fingers of Buffalo Trace. "That a new jacket you're wearing? Healy give you a raise already?" "Not exactly. More like a bonus. I guess it pays to be nice to the right people. But you never seem to learn that. Makes me worry about you." "Are you saying I don't treat you well enough? Should I treat you differently from the other men?" He shrugged. "Then I don't know why you would be worried about me. I'm certainly not. I am, however, worried about Jim Galbraith. I heard his water wheel was blown up again." She slapped the bar. "That's criminal. Not 3 months since the last time. Are you investigating?" Cotton arched his brow. "Looks like a kid's prank. Probably warming up for the 4th of July celebration." He studied his fingernails. "Big Jim's a fool for building that damn flume. Should have taken water from the mayor's canal like everybody else out that way." "Why can't a fella build whatever he wants on his own property? Jim's land runs along both sides of the Colorado. Seems to me whoever blew up that wheel was attacking and damaging private property. Folks in these parts don't take too kindly to that." "Seems to me you worry too much about Jim Galbraith." He glanced around the room. "Lot of wood in this structure. A fire would be a downright shame." He gave her a warning look, then strode out the door. A cowpoke called out, "How about a song, Sal?" Sally ambled the length of the polished mahogany bar to the opened end where the piano sat nearby. She nodded to One-A-Day, who played the intro to Rose of Killarney. A miner hunched over his beer and mumbled to his neighbor, "Her singing's the best part of a night at Little Eden." The desert sun was well up when Jim Galbraith wandered into the Little Eden saloon and sat down at his favorite table near a window. He glanced around in search of somebody. Anybody. One-A-Day's broom rested against the piano while the crown of his black derby moved back and forth behind the bar. Jim raised his voice. "Picking out a cigar, One-A-Day?" Ever since Doc told One-A-Day he could only have 1 cigar per day, Sally kept a supply just for him. To hear One-A-Day tell it, he started every day with a gorgeous Cuban. Everybody else believed it was just another stogie, but the labels, written in Spanish, had One-A-Day convinced. The locals took to calling him One-A-Day. Sally thought it was demeaning and refused to address him by any other name than his own, Paul. One-A-Day chuckled. "Wouldn't think it'd be so hard to do, would you, Jim?" "Nope. Are you working today?" "Like always. Sure sorry about your water wheel." When One-A-Day emerged from behind the bar, his cigar glowed red, and he carried a large coffee pot. "Want a cup?" "It smells mighty good." Jim hardly got the words out when a series of gunshots sounded behind the hotel. His head whipped around. "Don't fret, big man. That's just Miss Sally and the girls playing Eye of the Pig." He dusted his derby on his sleeve. "I set up the target for him this morning." Another 4 blasts rang out. "I figure they'll get in one more round before Deputy Dolph catches up to 'em and makes 'em stop." Jim grinned. "Who was winning when you left?" One-A-Day poured Jim's coffee. "Nobody beats Miss Sally, but Jenny Bull's a right fine shot. So is Lily. And by damn, little Candy's improving all the time. Mrs. Weaver never plays." "How about you?" One-A-Day cackled. I may not have hands big enough to grip a six-shooter, but my Springfield bolo knife found its way into the pig's eye 3 times before I turned the target over to the ladies." He patted the knife in the sheath he wore in place of a sidearm. "Want some breakfast? I expect Miss Sally will be along shortly. She's not eaten yet." "No, thanks. The coffee'll do me." "Is that you, Jim?" Sally's voice rang out a moment before she appeared from the back room. She wore a long-sleeved navy bangoline dress with a modern bustle. A white lace jabot adorned her throat. Jim removed his Stetson and grinned. "Howdy, my Boston lady." She smiled. "Sorry I wasn't here when you came in. I was out back socializing with Mrs. Weaver's girls." He grinned. "I heard you." One-a-day brought a coffee to Sally and the pot to refill Jim's mug. "Are you all right, Jim?" she asked. "We heard about your wheel." She sat opposite him. "I'm fine. Those scoundrels wouldn't pull something like that if anybody were around to stop them. All my men but one were in town." "Who do you figure's behind it?" He rubbed his fresh-shaved jaw. "We both know who's behind it. Who did it is another question. It takes a veteran miner to set the proper amount of dynamite. Healy's got plenty of those. Whoever did it took out the wheel with very little damage to the riverbank. The mayor wouldn't want a lot of mud rolling downstream to clog his canal and cut into his income." "Listen." She leaned closer. "Our deputy sheriff is sweet on Jenny Bull. He speaks freely with her. She told me the sheriff is a hired gun who's done prison time. The mayor got him out of Yuma right before Cotton showed up here." She tapped the table. "You be careful. I suspect they're looking to kill you." He interlaced his fingers across his flat stomach. "Guess I'll have to pay closer attention." He smiled, then changed the subject. "You riding in the parade on 4th of July? I expect all our dignitaries will take part. The Mojave and Chemehuevi tribes are both sending dancers." Her lips rose in a smile. "I'm planning on it. My buckboard's decorated already. Everybody loves the 4th. This year we've a band coming from Yuma for the street dance. Will you be there?" A slow grin spread across his face. 2 days later, as Doc dealt a hand of poker, a woman's shriek from upstairs cut the air. He crushed out his smoke and hustled for the stairs. Coming down from the 3rd floor, Sheriff Slade Cotton kept his eyes straight ahead and scowled when he passed Doc on the stairs. Doc guessed he'd been visiting one of the girls before he went to work. Cotton's shift at the jail started at 3 o'clock. Outside her open door, Mrs. Weaver clasped Candy Love to her bosom, cooing soft and calming words in the sobbing girl's ear. "Oh, what'll I do? He cut my face," Candy moaned. "I'm ruined. Nobody will want me. All I did was tell him no. Nobody should have to do what he demanded." She clung tighter to Mrs. Weaver's ample body. "Someday I swear I'll kill him." "What happened?" Doc asked. "Can I have a look?" Anger lit Mrs. Weaver's eyes. "Our brave sheriff beat her up." "Ah, damn." Doc gently took hold of the girl's shoulders. "Show me, Candy. I won't touch you. I just want to see for myself." When Candy turned, she tucked her chin as if embarrassed. Her camisole hung in shreds at the shoulder, and the exposed flesh was already showing a large bruise. Doc nodded to the darkening spot. "How'd you get this?" Candy sucked in a shuddering breath. "I fell against the iron bedpost when he hit me with a water pitcher. He broke it into pieces. I tried to stop him, but he was in a rage because I wouldn't do what he wanted." She looked away. "When I said no the second time, he cut my face with a shard of porcelain he hid in his hand. I fell backwards. When I tried to get up, he slugged me." She raised her face. Doc's eyes narrowed. Blood dripped from the long, deep gash that sliced Candy's cheek. Both eyes were swollen and would blacken soon. Her split lip needed stitches. Sally coughed softly. Doc turned, surprised she was there. Candy's eyes teared over. "He broke my beautiful ewer, Miss Sally, the one you gave me for my birthday. I'm awful sorry." Sally came to her and wrapped Candy in her arms. "It's okay, don't cry, I know it hurts." She stroked the girl's hair. "Doc has some laudanum, he'll take good care of you." She glanced at Doc. "She mustn't be seen. Can you treat her here?" "Of course." "Good. Tell me what you'll need and I'll get it. I'll have Paul fetch you a fresh pail of water and a stack of towels. Candy, you rest. We'll have you feeling better in no time." Mid-morning on the 4th of July, townspeople lined both sides of Main Street as the parade marched by, led by the five-piece band from Yuma. The mayor's carriage trailed behind. Various merchants' wagons decorated for the occasion followed. Sally's bunting-draped buckboard was among them. The revelers in the wagons tossed streamers and trinkets to the children and waved to their friends lining the way. Tribal dancers in beautiful beaded costumes came last. They danced, swooped, and twirled to the beat of ceremonial drums. Some carried wooden flutes, others hoops and feather-adorned bows. Sally and Mrs. Weaver's girls sat in the back of the buckboard, with One-A-Day on the seat driving the horses. A cheer rose as they passed by, tossing wrapped candy into the crowd. Wives smacked their men for ogling and whistling at the barroom girls in their scanty red, white, and blue costumes. The giggling girls shouted to Candy, who watched through heavy bandages from her window. She stepped onto the balcony, one of 5 above the street, waved, and then darted back inside. When the parade reached the end of its route, Sally made her way back through the crowd to Little Eden. After lunch, Mrs. Weaver and her girls headed upstairs to rest before work. One by one, they settled on their balconies, hoping to relax and catch a breeze off the river. That afternoon, Doc checked Candy's stitches, then strolled into the half-filled saloon. He found Sally working in the storeroom and reported on Candy's condition. "Thanks, Doc," Sally said. "Help yourself to a drink. On me." One-A-Day burst into the storeroom as Doc left. "Miss Sally," he hissed, "come quick. Jim's asking for you and he looks madder'n all hell." Sally didn't ask why. She turned and hurried to the bar where Jim stood leaning on his elbows. Doc still held a bottle of rye in one hand and its lid in the other when Sally moved behind the bar and faced Jim. Something was terribly wrong. Without asking, she grabbed the bottle from Doc, poured 2 fingers into a shot glass, and pushed it to Jim. He nodded his thanks and lifted his glass to his lips. "Want to talk?" she whispered. He set his jaw. "I killed a man today." He stared at her as if judging her reaction. Doc looked on as Sally's fingers spread across her chest. "Oh my God, who?" Sally asked. "What happened?" "Don't know the feller's name. My entire elevated aqueduct was blown to smithereens this morning. 1/2 mile long, all destroyed. Happened as I was leaving for town. Charges were set in 5 places. My hired man and I caught up to him before they got away. Shots were fired, and I killed the fella who appeared to be leading the gang." Sally laid her hand on his forearm. "Did you recognize any of them?" Jim gave a small shake of his head. "I feel terrible the man's dead. He might have had a family, but he and his crew came to cause trouble." His eyes moved from Sally to Doc. "I don't know how long it'll take me to rebuild the flume, if ever." He glanced toward the street. "I just left the sheriff's office. He wasn't there, so I told his deputy." Hinges squealed when the town's barber pushed through the doors and waved for Doc to come with him. Doc slipped behind Sally and said to Big Jim, "I have to go, but don't worry. Clearly, you defended yourself and your home, and that's all." Before Doc reached the door, Sheriff Cotton stormed in. Doc paused. "Jim, you're under arrest for murder." Cotton reached for Jim's arm. Jim yanked away. "Not today, I'm not." Doc bolted forward. "See here, Sheriff, you're making—" Cotton waved at Doc to shut up. "I said I'm taking you in, mister." Jim scoffed. "Like hell you are." Cotton glared. "You're defying my authority? I'm thinking we best take this outside." Jim's brows rose. "That so? You aiming to draw down on me?" Cotton grinned. "You got two choices, jail or a gunfight on Main Street." Doc's jaw dropped. Jim could never survive a gunfight. "Stop, wait. Out of the way, Doc." Cotton's jaw jutted forward. "What's it gonna be, sodbuster? You ready to die?" Jim scowled. "I'll see you in the street." Both men slammed through the doors. The crowd surged onto the sidewalk behind them. One-a-day scurried over to Sally. "You think Jim can draw fast enough?" "In a pig's eye," she signaled Mrs. Weaver. "Bring your girls and come on. Jim might need some help." The women dashed upstairs. One-a-day moved outside to the edge of the crowd. Doc gripped a corner post and watched in fear. Storekeepers came out of their shops for a closer look. Jim and the sheriff strode into the street and paced off in opposite directions. Sweat trickled down Doc's ribs as he counted their steps and watched his friend face certain death. With 2 strides to go, someone in the crowd gasped when the sheriff drew his gun and whirled. At the sound, Jim spun. Guns roared. The sheriff flew backwards onto the ground. Jim, gun in hand, stared at the sheriff's body. He inched forward. "Don't touch him!" Doc shouted and dashed into the street, waving his arms. "Stay back, everyone. You too, Jim. The rest of you go about your business. Show's over." Doc knelt over the corpse, his ear to the sheriff's chest. Then he clambered to his feet. "He's dead, all right." On their balconies, Candy and the other ladies of Little Eden leaned against the railing, staring below. Each held a rifle. Mayor Healy cursed as he burst from the crowd. Hands fisted, he strode towards Doc. "That's far enough, Mayor," Doc shouted. Jim's eyes cut from the mayor to the corpse. A Springfield bolo knife protruded from Cotton's chest, and 5 bullet wounds bled through his plaid shirt. Deputy Dolph hustled from the jail, plucking the sheriff's gun out of the dust as he joined Doc. "Damn, he never got off a shot." He noticed the women above him. "Doc, them women are holding guns. One of them whores must have murdered the sheriff." He glanced again at Jim. "Knew you couldn't put him down." He rubbed his head. "Guess I'll have to arrest all 4 of them." Doc shook his head. "Good grief, Dolph, only one person killed him. Maybe I can figure out who's responsible once I examine the body." He pointed toward Cotton's boots. "Help me carry him to my office." Later that week, Doc gave Deputy Dolph his official report. "My exam proves that Big Jim Galbraith killed the sheriff." Dolph gaped. "But them women, after I helped you move the body, I looked at their guns. They were all still warm from being fired, and I saw the 5 holes in Cotton's bloody shirt." He shook his head. "The mayor won't like this. He's hopping mad 'cause Cotton's dead and Jim ain't." Dolph paused. "What about that knife?" The knife missed the heart. Only 1 bullet pierced the heart. Jim's. No doubt about it. Doc laid the knife on the desk. "Please give that to One-a-day." Dolph frowned. "I don't believe you. It had to be one of them women. They're always practicing playing Eye of the Pig behind the hotel. Sally's a sharpshooter. She wouldn't miss. Besides, I never saw Jim draw down on nobody. Nor have I, but he sure as hell made a fine job of it. Doc raised his palm. Listen, I've been reading how to determine where a bullet comes from. My source is a world expert, and I applied his methods. Now, keep in mind, Cotton is 3 inches taller than Jim. The bullets from the women's guns struck the sheriff with a downward slant. Each missed the heart, but they tore big holes in the chest cavity. Any one of them could have done him in, but none did. The slug that hit the heart killed him instantly. That bullet was smaller than the others. It entered the heart with an upward angle and straight on. The only shooter in position to do that was Jim. He must have shot from the hip because he fired so fast. My guess is his gun barely cleared his holster. You're joking. Nope. Nobody knew Jim could shoot like that. I sure as hell didn't. Cotton cheated. We all saw him. He never set his feet nor gave Jim time to get set. Big Jim took him down fair and square. I'll testify to that when the circuit judge gets here. He pointed to his report. I included drawings showing how I figured it. Dolph placed his hands on his hips. I'm warning you, Mayor Healy ain't gonna like this. Doc grinned. He may not like my report, but it'll be small potatoes when Big Jim brings charges against Healy for attempted murder. Every one of the crew at his mine told me they'd testify to what he's been doing. Healy's days are done. The end. And that is the end of a short story called Who Shot the Sheriff by our guest, Merle McCann. Fun story and lots of great characters, Merle. You can learn more about Merle McCann's books at her website at merlemccannauthor.com, and that's MERLEMCCANN author.com. And her novels are on Amazon, along with a variety of short story collections. The details are in the show notes. Thank you so much for being with us today, Merle.
Oh, I've loved every minute. Laurie, you made it easy.
In our AuthorX-tra, we highlight prolific writer Andrea Ibanez, who writes 2 cozy mystery series set in the 1930s as Andrea Kress. Her Berkshire's cozy mystery series features young nurse-turned-amateur sleuth Aggie Burnside in a small town in western Massachusetts in the 1930s. The Massachusetts cozy mystery series has her cousin, socialite Amanda Burnside, solving crimes in Boston. An anthropologist trained at Syracuse University and Duke University, Andrea retired from a career as a public administrator at the city of Tucson. Find out more on her website at andreas-books.com. That's ANDREAS-books.com. Come back next time when on episode number 20, you'll hear more episodes from Art of the Steal, from my crime fiction novel's audiobook, Bleeder. And on episode 21, join us when author Desmond Ryan of Toronto reads from his humorous mystery called Mary Margaret and the Case of the Lapsed Parishioner. If you're listening on the podcast platform of your choice, please subscribe and leave a review or provide us with feedback. If you're on YouTube at Read Laurie Fagen, please subscribe, give us a thumbs up, and click on the bell to be notified when a new episode has been released. And for some freebies, check out our Patreon page at Murder in the Air Mystery Theater. For more information, you can visit readlauriefagen.com. Thanks so much for listening, and come back again, where you'll always find murder in the air.